Assalamu alaikum everyone. My name is Tesneem and I recently wrote a paper known as or titled Religious Minorities Under Muslim Rule. And so today I just wanted to spend a little time answering any questions that are live and also go over a lot of the questions that I was able to receive beforehand. So if you are watching, please join and add questions. So just a little bit about me before we go ahead and get started is that, let me just pull up all of these questions and notes that I was able to get beforehand. So I'm currently a PhD candidate in Islamic Studies at Georgetown University, and what I'm studying there, right now I'm just doing coursework, so I'm getting a whole array of topics, classes, and all of the fun stuff, alhamdulillah. So I'm not specialized in anything yet. My goal, inshallah, is to in Islamic law, specifically legal methodology. Got a long road ahead of me, alhamdulillah, and fortunately I have Dr. Brown as my advisor to really help lead the way. And I joined Yaqeen Institute, funny enough, when Sheikh Omar had released a video on his page about it, I watched the link to it. This was, at this point, I had just finished my first year of graduate school, and I had messaged one of my closest friends saying, oh my God, he stole my idea. This is exactly what I wanted to do in the long run, alhamdulillah. So he made it a lot easier for me, and of course the rest of the Yaqeen team has made it a lot easier. I was able to jump right in, and inshallah I'll be able to contribute now, and hopefully it'll get better over the next 10, 20 years. But I want to make it clear that I am a student, and alhamdulillah, there really is a long road ahead. But it's important to realize, I guess, the limit of my knowledge, and I think that when it comes to answering questions, when it comes to writing papers, it's important to acknowledge it for the readers, for the audience. And so I'll try to answer all your questions as best as I can, and I'll be honest, if there are certain questions that I don't have a complete answer to, or I'm not aware of, or it's beyond my field, I will admit it. I'm not going to try to make up answers to, you know, just for the sake of it. So I'll do my best, inshallah, and just be patient with me. I love constructive criticism. I received a few emails that some people were probably not happy with my paper. A lot of people, actually, alhamdulillah, so far I've gotten a lot of positive feedback, but for those individuals that personally messaged me or personally emailed me saying that, you know, I think you could have talked about this, or maybe you took this approach a little too much, or whatever the case was, I really appreciated that, because the purpose of this initial paper was really just to open start the discussion. There's so much you can talk about when it comes to religious minorities, when you talk about things that have spanned 1400 years. It's not something you can cover in a paper. You can't cover it in a book. And so I really appreciate when people can offer, you know, advice on what they want to see next, because this is an ongoing process. And inshallah in the future, I'll be able to, you know, add on to these papers, contribute, and based on what, you know, what people want to read and what people want to see. So that being said, even if you're unable to catch the live version of this Q&A, to message Yaqeen, to message, my email is on Yaqeen's website as well. If you guys have any feedback, I would love to hear it. And then inshallah, when I'm working on future papers, I can keep that in mind. So again, so that was really just a general introduction to the topic, and I think what's important about discussing this topic is because if you open, I mean, a lot of books on the topic that are written from a Western perspective or an Orientalist perspective or whatever it is, most of the time it's just not a pretty picture, and there's been an effort to really erase our history. And so that's what's so exciting about Yaqeen, is an opportunity for us to rewrite our history and to rewrite it in an authentic manner, inshallah. So that being said, of course, I made a lot of generalizations, and I understand that. And I'm looking forward to, you know, getting into more details in the future. But I want people to have that image in mind. It's not such a dark past all the time. And again, I'm not one to romanticize the past, but it's important to recognize that we're not, you know, we're not as negative as has always been written about us. So with that introduction, you know, I'll quickly get into a lot of the questions that I received beforehand. And again, I just saw a question or two posted, so I will look at those inshallah. And just last thing, alhamdulillah, the Huffington Post article, so that was sort of a miniature version, sort of a nothing version compared to the paper. It was just to get people interested, to really catch people's attention for people who don't want to read a 20-page paper. And alhamdulillah, it did receive over 4,000 shares in 48 hours, which, I mean, it reflects the need for this type of work. Clearly, people had a lot of questions on the topic, and that's why I think it's really important. It's really exciting because there's a lot we can talk about. But for those of you who've only read the Huffington Post article, please, 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 I encourage you to read the entire paper when you have a chance. If you want to break it down into sections over days, whatever it is, just because I was able to get in a little more details with that. So that being said, so J. Abdul Hakim, I'll go ahead and do live questions and go back and forth to other questions that have been asked. So he asked, are there different versions of the Pact of Umar? Some versions seem to also have strict regulations on churches, synagogues, etc. So it's an excellent question, and this comes up a lot in different secondary sources. And in fact, there's a difference of opinion, a difference of scholarly work, whatever it may be, on the origins of the Pact of Umar. So number one, you have scholars, academics who doubt its authenticity entirely. And the reason why I didn't want to address this in the paper specifically, and of course I can definitely more in the future if people are interested in that, is that although academics or some people don't accept it as entirely authentic, it's so important to still look at it because so many Muslim scholars over the centuries did take it as authentic. And in fact, Ibn al-Qayyim, he basically, in his Ahkam Ahl al-Dhimma, he writes an entire tafsir or commentary on the Pact of Umar. So Shurut al-Umayriyya, which is what Ibn al-Qayyim refers to it in his compendium, he takes it seriously, and he takes it as one of the primary sources along with the Quran and the Sunnah. And so that's important to keep in mind. So there's number one, there's a question of authenticity. Number two, there's a question of authorship. So some people, what has been, and I think this is something that I lean towards a little, is that there's an opinion that the Pact of Umar was originally attributed to Umar ibn al-Khattab, and then after that, it had the basics in it. And then when it came to the caliphate of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, who was the third caliph in the Umayyad caliphate, there's an assumption that he authored half of it really, and that those more stricter regulations are actually attributed to Umar ibn Abdul Aziz and not Umar ibn Khattab. Again, that's just an opinion. There's various evidences to prove or disprove that. And just based on the limited knowledge that I have, I do think that is, as for what I've come across so far, that is the most reasonable answer. And then there's a third group that says, Umar al-Khattab actually wrote all of it. And it really just, it's a matter of what evidence makes more sense, or whoever's argument is stronger when it comes to that. Okay. Are there cases of mass forced conversion by Muslims in the first 200 years of Islam? This is a fantastic question. And I think that, this is by Yusuf, so thank you. I just want to acknowledge the fact that I can see these live questions. Funny enough, I mean, Muslim rulers didn't want people converting to Islam because that means they're not going to get the jizya tax out of them. So it doesn't really work to their advantage. So, there's an assumption that, we're going to convert everyone, everyone's going to become Muslim. But a lot of, when you're going through a lot of historical sources, they'll describe caliphs trying to even prevent conversions, because the more people that are converting, the less money they're going to be getting through the jizya tax. So that wasn't necessarily the case, to answer that one. Okay, so again, IJ Abdul Hakim asked, while non-Muslims living may have been different in the pre-modern nation states, how do we understand the new rules today? Some of them seem to be against modern kinds of citizenship laws. Wonderful question, and this is also a question that was asked beforehand by a lot of people on Facebook separately. And I just want to make it clear, by no means am I trying to advocate for a caliphate, and I know a lot of people were making comments about that. And the reason why the beginning of my paper began with what is known as the Marrakesh Declaration, and there's a link to the website. I'd encourage you guys to all, check that out. But I mean, essentially what that is that you have hundreds of scholars, they met in Morocco. Again, criticism or just concerns about that meeting aside, the matter of fact is that you have hundreds of scholars meeting up from wide backgrounds, from different countries, and what they entirely agreed on was the fact that the only thing that they want to refer to is the Charter of Medina. And these people, I mean, they have the more knowledge than I will ever have, and they saw the I guess the benefits. They had that insight in acknowledging the fact that that's just not applicable today, and it's entirely okay. And that's exactly what they advocate for, is that we are now going to implement modern forms of citizenship. This is the society we live in today, and that's entirely okay. And that doesn't contradict the Sharia by any means. People assume that, oh, if we're not instituting it, then it's not Islamic, and that's absolutely not true. I want to give an example, but I also don't want to go into anything controversial, so I'll just stop right there. But again, in the paper, I also mentioned Yusuf al-Qaradawi, and a lot of prominent scholars today have advocated for different forms of citizenship, for equal rights between Muslims and non-Muslims, and that's not something that is unheard of, and that's something that we can definitely accept. Okay, so Jazakumullah khairan for the live questions so far. I'm going to go ahead until I get some more. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Samaddin Nicholas. Sorry if I kill any names. I'll go to some of the questions that I received beforehand. So feel free to keep posting questions, and inshallah I'll get to them. Okay, this is taking up half my screen. All right, so Ali Akbar asked a really good question, and he said, would atheists or newer religions like Mormonism or Bahais be granted dhimmi status? Well, for one, the dhimmi status was extended to Hindus in the Mughal Empire, and so really it just implies that some of these rulers saw fit to move beyond those who are associated with the people of the book. And that's something that I also emphasize within the paper, is that most of these rules, it boiled down to whatever the ruler wanted. And so the rulers decided Hindus are religious minorities, and it doesn't really matter that they are not specified as people of the book. We're going to extend it to that. And so yes, very much so. And again, this does depend on the ruler and the scholar. That being said, I mean, this is all hypotheticals, because if we're talking about atheism, which is a new manifestation, it's very recent, or newer religions, we don't have a dhimmi paradigm anymore, and I'm not calling for one. So I think that this is, if they existed a few hundred years ago, then yes, hypothetically, yes, they could be a part of dhimmi status. But again, as I said, scholars today who have a lifetime more of knowledge than I do have agreed that citizenship is a perfectly fine way, a form of conception today. Okay, sorry, I'm going back and forth to the live questions and the question. Dr. Jonathan Brown alluded that a minority of scholars said only Jews, Christians, and Zoroastrians were those who could be dhimmi. What evidence did these few scholars have? Great question. So number one, Jews and Christians are specifically mentioned in the Quran as Ahlul Kitab, or people of the book. And the reason that Zoroastrians were included in that was because technically, even though they were pagans and they had forms of shirk that are entirely unacceptable, they had a book, they had a scripture that they referred to, and solely for that reason, that they had something to refer to that they saw was holy, scholars extended that to them. And so you can see there's a form of leniency in creating these rulings. They weren't interested in finding excuses to not grant people protection, and that's really the beauty of it. And that's why there's a lot of leniency in extending that ruling to people who are not people of the book. There's room for that. Salam, this is from Muhammad Abdullah. To what extent would an idealistic modern Islamic rule today accommodate the many diverse theologies that are not inherently Ahlul Kitab, with references to Hanafis, Ijtihad, I'm assuming that says Ijtihad, and including Hindus, etc., to the jizya like Majus? So I just answered that question. Jazakumullah khairan, it's a great question. That's something that I don't want to talk about modern rule. And I'm not just saying that because the me paradigm doesn't exist today. I'm saying that because that's not my field of expertise, and I'm not going to pretend I'm someone that I'm not. And so, probably yes, under the Mughal Empire, Hindus were considered Ahlul Kitab. Not Ahlul Kitab, they were considered Dhimmis, I'm sorry. Do you know that Dhimmis must wear clothing that marks them out as Dhimmis and be discriminated in a Muslim majority country? Absolutely not. Again, I'm trying to emphasize the fact that I don't, I see to scholarly opinions, people who are more knowledgeable than me that have needed the me paradigm today. Wallahu, whether I'm wrong or right, these scholars know more than me, and they find that acceptable. They find that equal rights are acceptable, and that's something that that sits well with me. So, Allahu A'lam. So no, I don't believe in discrimination in any form here in America or anywhere in the world. So until I get some more live questions, I'm going to go ahead and go back to a lot of the questions I received beforehand. Let's see, Adi Akbar also asked this question, and this is something that hopefully I'll be able to allude to throughout and come back to it with more questions. And he said, basically in the article I stated that religious minorities were allowed to have their own legal autonomy and to follow the Sharia. But my question is, coming from Ali Akbar, how did this occur when Muslims are commanded to enjoin good and forbid evil? Shouldn't they have been made to follow the Sharia due to its superior moral worth over the religious laws of the minorities? My question is, basically, to what extent did the tolerance of minorities' religious laws occur in spite of it contradicting the morals of the Sharia? Wonderful question. Because granting religious autonomy to these people who have accepted the contract is exactly what is commanding good and forbidding evil. That's exactly what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intended. He says, the multiple verses in the Quran, لا إكراه في الدين, there's no compulsion in religion. ولا تجادلوا أهل الكتاب إلا بالتي هي أحسن إلا الذين ظلموا منهم. Don't argue, don't fight, don't do anything with the people of the book except that which is better. Unless there's the case of oppression and other unusual circumstances. وَقُولُوا آمَنَّا بِالَّذِي أُنزِلَ إِلَيْنَا وَأُنزِلَ إِلَيْكُمْ. And just say we believe in what has been revealed to us, and you go ahead and believe in what has been revealed to you. وَإِلَهُنَا وَإِلَهُكُمْ وَاحِدٌ وَنَحْنُ لَهُ مُسْلِمُونَ. And that both of our lords are one. We believe in the same God, and we'll all submit to that God. Again, in Surah Mumtahina, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لا ينهاكم الله عن الذين لم يقاتلوكم في الدين ولم يخرجوكم من دياركم أن تبروهم وتقسطوا إليهم إن الله يحب المقسطين. That God does not forbid you from those who aren't out to kill you because of your religion specifically, or people who aren't trying to kick you out of your homes, basically people who aren't waging war against you. There's nothing wrong with not even just being righteous towards them, but to be like the most supreme form of justice towards these people. And that's something that unfortunately there's this social manifestation in Muslim majority countries where there's a negative outlook on Muslim minorities. But the amount of evidence, honestly, it was so exciting coming across a lot of the information that I was reading, because it's the exact opposite of what people are really have just been used to. And of course, this is not a blanket statement. A lot of people have been taught the exact opposite, justice all around, and that's great. And it was interesting because one of the things that I came across was Shahabuddin al-Qarafi, who was a Maliki jurist, a traditional Maliki jurist. He said that فَمَنْ اعْتَدَى عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَوْ بِكَلِمَةٍ سُوءٍ أَوْ غِيبَةٍ. So whoever does injustice to them by just an evil word, or ghiba, slandering them or talking behind their back or whatever, that is enough to compromise the protection that they are granted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet. And that, I mean, that's just mind-blowing. I don't know what limits we've created for ourselves today, but we've definitely exceeded them. And that's something that really we need to revisit this topic. It's so important because it's affecting our day-to-day interactions. I mean, alhamdulillah, I think there's places where it was so fortunate. Yesterday, for example, Jews' graves that were desecrated, the Muslims had been able to raise, $60,000 about just to repay that. And that really is, that's exactly what Islam is teaching. And it's beautiful. And that's something that, I want to encourage. And so again, the Sharia is something that it allows for that religious autonomy. So we're not contradicting the Sharia by allowing that. In fact, we're following it and we're following the commands of God, and in that there's reward. So, and just lastly, even there's many hadith of the Prophet that basically whoever harms someone who's mu'ahid, who has a contract with Muslimin, then the Prophet himself, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, will be his adversary on the Day of Judgment. The Prophet himself. So, I mean, that's just really, we need to think about this stuff and be really, really careful about what we say, because this is, there's serious implications to that. Okay, so alhamdulillah, we're getting, I think, a little more live questions, so I'll go through these. So Tamim Farouk asked, okay, wait, sorry, there's a lot of questions. Okay, so Tamim Farouk asked, how would clothing of dhimmis differ from the Muslims? For example, what would non-Muslim women wear versus Muslim wear? So I'm going to assume that this question is being asked for something not now, because that's not, my paper was addressing like 1,000 years ago. So, so for example, so when the ruling of hijab came down, in Arab society, this is particular to Arab society. There was obviously Muslims and non-Muslims after the Prophet's arrival, and they had their heads were covered, and basically they had a wrap, and that it was tied to the back. And so when the ruling of hijab came, the point of the ayah was, so now take what's dragging or leaning or whatever from the back and move it forward to cover your chest. And so, I mean, Arabs at the time, that was very common for women to cover their hair partially, not entirely, whatever it was. And specifically the example I gave in terms of different dress is that of the belt. And that was something that was of Greek origin. So the non-Muslims that were coming into Arabia, so from the Byzantine empires, the Sasanian empires, they were bringing in different dress methods. Those varied a lot. The only example I really gave in the paper was that of the belt. So, I mean, it's not something like they're coming in with pants or anything at this point. I mean, that was with the Persians as well. It's not something too crazy, I guess. Just minor differences. Okay, so that was a pretty vague answer, but I'll leave it at that. Okay, so sorry, there's trying to get to, it just keeps moving up, so I'm trying to catch one. Where'd it go? Sajid Riyasat, I think, he asked, Muslim scholars state that when dhimmis pay the jizya, they are to be made to feel subjugated. Have you come across this opinion? Yes, I have come across this opinion. But I've also come across a million other opinions, and that's really what makes this topic even more exciting, because there's just, when you look at the opinions and you look at who's saying them and for what circumstances, I mean, subhanAllah, you think like even Ibn Taymiyyah in some of his rulings, he was very so-called strict towards non-Muslims, and you think about it, and he's living when Mughals or non-Muslims are just ravaging the land. And so there's a lot of contextualization to happen even when you're looking at scholarly opinions. That being said, another vast opinion, and this is something that Ibn al-Qayyim discusses a lot, the definition of subjugation. And he states that some scholars agree to the fact that subjugation, and Yusuf al-Qaradawi, other even contemporary scholars have completely agreed that it could refer to the fact that they're just subjugated to the rules of the land. And I mean, we're subjugated to rules of any land now or 1,000 years ago. If you're not participating in the rules of the land, you're either, contributing to treason, you're contributing to lawlessness, whatever it is. And I mean, you can't even speed here, you get a ticket, right? So the concept of just abiding by the law of the land is something that is an interpretation that I appreciate, I guess. So let's see. Sorry, did I say Mughals? I meant Mongols. I speak really fast, sorry about that. Okay, so I know there's a couple more questions coming in. I want to address just one or two more that I got beforehand, because I think a lot of you guys might have these questions as well. One of the questions was why are there so many conflicting opinions regarding what was assigned, how much was charged, and for whom it was required. And this was really interesting reading in this section in Ibn al-Qayyim. And basically he said that there was never a set amount. The Prophet ﷺ had never set an amount. So of course then this of ijtihad and process, a lot of different processes in arriving at conclusions for something that the Prophet didn't declare. And Umar ibn Khattab, when he was initially assigning it, he was saying he assigned the poor a certain amount, the middle class a certain amount, and the rich a certain amount. Now that exact amount is sort of irrelevant because when other companions were going to other places, they had different amounts as well. So when a companion went to the people of Yemen, they were assigned a specific amount. And what was really, I think what really hit home was when Ibn al-Qayyim specifically mentioned whatever you're collecting and how much of you are collecting. Number one, it depends on the ruler because they can acknowledge the situation on the ground and see what the status of people are. But he says, مِمَّا تَيَسَّرَ مِنْ أَمْوَالِهِمْ, whatever is easiest from their amwal, their property. So it could be coins, it could be silver or gold or whatever it is, or it could just be someone's shield, it could be someone's clothing. It's not intended to burden people. And that was, I think I gave several examples in the paper, but I wanted to make it clear it wasn't intended to burden anyone in that fact, in that regard. And the example that I gave in my paper, for those of you who haven't been able to read it all, was that a couple of the tax collectors had come to Umar ibn Khattab and they were giving him over the money of the people of Palestine. And Umar ibn Khattab, looks at the amount of money. He says, please, where did you get all this money? Did you guys, ahlaktumun nas, did you destroy the people in collecting this? And then, they're like, no, we only did what was acceptable, what was everything following the rules, and he basically praises God after that because he's like, I don't want to be held accountable for that. That is something that, you don't mess with. And there's just so many different examples I could go for that. And even the example of Umar ibn Khattab again, so he said, خَفِّفُوا عَنْهُ, like the one who's giving the jizya, lighten his burden. And if someone is older, just don't collect it every single year. There's so much discussion about how you can make things easier. And there's even a story that Umar ibn Khattab, he witnesses, or he comes across a man, an old Jewish man, and he's begging the people for money. And he goes to him and he asks about his situation, and then he realizes that this man is old and he has a need. And so not only does, he wasn't even collecting jizya from him, he takes him to Bayt al-Mal, the bank of Muslims, I guess, I don't know how to translate that, and he gives him money from that, from the money that's collected from the zakat, etc. And so it's not even just, okay, let's make this easier for them. If they need money, of course we'll give them money. That's, we want to, take care of our society. Okay. Sorry, if the questions are really long, I don't want to waste time reading through all of them, so I'm just looking for the nice short questions. Was proselytization, this is Talal al-Uthman, of dhimmis a goal for past Muslim empires? I mentioned this really early on, and again, that wasn't a concern. They don't want people to convert because then they can't collect the jizya. So it depends on the situation, really. Amir asked, were the Khulafat representatives of both the Muslims and the non-Muslims living in the empire in an equal sense? So there's many instances going through just like the history of people complaining to the Khalifa. And basically what was the dynamic that was established was that, if someone is not addressing your concerns, or if you're being oppressed or harmed or whatever in any way, then you can go to the person above him, until you reach the Khalifa. So even if you have a concern with the Khalifa, you can take it to a judge. And so you have, the famous story that's narrated in Ibn al-Kathir's Al-Bidayah wa Nihaya, where Ali, a man stole Ali's shield, Ali radiallahu anhu, who was the caliph at the time. And I mean, he's the caliph at the time, so it's like, okay, well, now there's a problem between a dhimmi and a caliph. And so the example was that, so then Ali ibn Abi Talib takes him to the judge at the time, Shuraih, and he says, this guy stole my shield. And then the judge says, okay, so, he turns to the Jew, in some narrations he's Christian, and says, okay, well, he just accused you of stealing the shield. What's going on? And he said, no, it's my shield. He's lying. And so the judge turns to Ali and he says, okay, well, do you have any proof? He's like, well, I guess not. I really don't have any proof. And so because of that, Ali concedes the fact that he can't get the shield back. And so he tells the judge, whatever you rule is just. And the judge ruled in favor of the man who stole the shield because Ali had no evidence to prove otherwise. And in conclusion, the man was walking away, had stolen the shield, and he takes a couple of steps and he turns around and says, whatever you just judge by, that is definitely the judgment of the prophets. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. So he took the shahada at that point, returned the shield, admitted to the fact that he stole it. So you have the interaction. There's a lot of different stories that I had come across as well, but that's a little more famous, I guess, that, non-Muslims could testify, and that they can complain to the Khalifa or to anyone. Okay, there's just one last question. I know I have to end soon, but it was a really good question that I had received beforehand, and sorry, let me find it. It's really good. Okay, yes. So Ali Akbar had asked this. He said, is it obligatory for Muslims to demand that the jizya be paid by non-Muslims at all times in history everywhere? Or is it something that depends on historical context? My question stems from the fact that I read that the Ottoman ulama abolished the jizya during the 19th century. And this, I think, was a really good question because now we're getting into modern conceptualizations of the jizya. And so yes, and that's exactly what happened. In the mid-19th century, during the Ottoman Empire, I should say beforehand, before this Reformation, there was a millet system in the Ottoman Empire. And basically what that meant is that everyone was defined by their millah. Millet in Turkish and millah in Arabic, which means nation. So Syrian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, whatever it was, they had their own religious autonomy, their own groups, and for every millet there was a representative, a leader, whoever, and that person would always report to the Sultan. And then later in the mid-19th century, as a result of various circumstances, international pressure, pressure to modernize, a handful of reasons, there was a Reformation period known as the Tanzimat. Tanzimat literally meaning reorganization of the Ottoman Empire. And among those reforms was a vision to transform the people of the empire. The Ottoman Empire, and basically from taking people as subjects to people as citizens. And this included both Muslims and non-Muslims. And with that came the abolishment of the state tax. And so we're seeing manifestations of current day forms of citizenship. And guess what? That happened under Muslim rule, and it was completely fine. And so again, it depends on the ruler, it depends on the scholars, and what their final judgment is on that. It's permissible. And so that's something that, for those who might doubt that nothing can happen unless you have the dhimmi paradigm, well, we saw this play out in the 1800s in the Ottoman Empire. So this just gives room for just, I guess, different options, really. So I'm not sure if I'm supposed to keep continuing or stop because it's 12:35. Okay, so alhamdulillah, there's a lot more questions. Okay, let me try to maybe catch one or two more before I have to go. I know I'm not supposed to be going too long. Okay, so Asadullah, you asked, in regard to certain Islamophobes arguing that the Medina Charter and the Dhimmi status in general made non-Muslims second-class citizens, do you believe that a comparative analysis with the Jewish and Christian traditions at the time, which showcase similar separations between other religions. For example, many complained that because Muslim women are not allowed to intermarry, that this is looking down on non-Muslims. However, I wonder if Jewish and Christian groups also apply the same rules and regulations to their own communities, where said rules made by Muslims would have been seen as irrelevant or justified to them. Yeah, that's great. I would definitely love to add that as an appendix to this paper or include it in future papers, inshallah. But so I can't off the top of my head think of specific examples. I don't want to cite anything. But yes, there was definitely the case. And whether it was law or not law, there was that social pressure to not do that. So even when you had examples of Jewish women coming to the courts so in the paper, just to elaborate a little more, in the paper, for those of you guys who didn't get a chance to read it, there was an edict, there was at a certain time, I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, where Jewish women were going to Muslim courts to seek the rabbinical courts at the time they would lose their property rights if they sought a divorce through the rabbinical courts. So as a result, naturally, they just go to Muslim courts because they're not going to lose any of their property rights when they seek a divorce there. That in turn pressured the Jewish leadership to reform that particular aspect of the law. And so that way, when Jewish women would go to rabbinical courts, they wouldn't lose their property rights. And so you can see that interaction of, okay, so, you know, do we really want our women going to Muslim courts to do any of this stuff? So that in itself is an example of let's restrict our relationship. Every religious community wants to maintain that autonomy because it serves to their own strength and power, and that's entirely fine. But yeah, I would love to look for more specific examples in the future, inshallah. And even I think I cited in the paper, if not, it was in my notes, that in the Byzantine Empire, in the Sasanian Empire, Zoroastrians weren't allowed to marry non-Zoroastrians, and you couldn't mix with that. So the intermarriage wasn't allowed, for example. So yeah, there's definitely examples. And again, and just to conclude with this, what the paper really sought to do was not to really make any concrete arguments as of yet. I'm still building on that, inshallah. To just contextualize. This was a norm, and as I said in the paper, it was liberating in many ways. It went beyond the norm and granted more rights to religious minorities, and that's something that we can appreciate. And it's not something that's rigid. There's a lot of room for reform. There's a lot of room for considering different contexts and societies, and that's something that is fantastic about Islam, and that's exactly what I want to do in my studies. So I might be a little biased to the topic, but yes, legal methodology, legal reform, all of that stuff is very applicable when considering these questions. Okay, so I'm just assume that I'm going to stop talking. Please continue asking questions. If you don't want to ask on the Facebook page, please shoot me an email. I have it listed on the Yaqeen website. It's just my name, Tesneem, with an E, not an A, 01@gmail.com. And I appreciate constructive criticism. If you have something that you think I can add, or maybe look at it from a different perspective, please do so. Just send me your sources as well if you're making an argument. It was really nice. Someone had messaged me a lot of criticism, but it was in a very respectful manner, and we were able to exchange resources, and I intend to read those and incorporate them in future papers, inshallah. So with that, jazakumullah khairan for participating. Inshallah, you guys benefited, and I look forward to contributing, helping our society grow and really just be more confident in our religion. So jazakumullah khairan.